spend some time writing the code for those two situations. I'm going to write the code for the first one, and then you can think about how you would write the code for the second one, and maybe pause the video and do that before you look at the solution. So remember, we already wrote the code that reads in all the temperature values, and we printed them out in a nested loop structure. If the next thing that I want to do is find the smallest temperature value over a 2-week period, add that in here. I need to create a nested loop structure. So I'm going to start my first loop. You can use for loops or while loops. Both are great for count controlled situations. And either is completely appropriate to use in this portion of the program. I'm going to use a for loop just because I think it's easier to write those. Typically, if I'm writing a for loop to process data in the table, I call my outside loop row because we're using that to process all the rows of the table. I want to start processing at row number 0, the first row, and I want to keep going while row is less than, I think I got a constant in here. Yes. Weeks. And then I also want to iterate through all the different columns of the table. I'm going to write my nested loop. And a lot of times I use the identifier column as my loop control variable for the inside loop. And I want to go through all the possible column values, so 0 through 6, and I want to increase the column value by 1 each time I move through the loop. And then let's think about this. Suppose I want to write an algorithm to find the smallest temperature. Well, one way to find the smallest temperature is to keep an extra variable that stores that smallest temperature value. I'm going to say double smallest temp equals, and then I could initialize it to either a really large value, something where I know like immediately I'm going to replace that large value with something from the table. I could also set it equal to one of the actual data values in the table. For example, I know that I'm going to have data values at temperature, row 0, column 0. That might not end up being the smallest value in the table, but it's a fine starting point to assume that that's the smallest. And then if we find something that's actually smaller later, we'll replace that data value with the new information as our smallest temperature. So remember, each time I'm at the intersection here, each time I'm inside the nested loop, I'm looking at a new intersection of the row and column in the table. And I want to see if that data value, temperature, row, column, is less than my smallest temp. And if it is, then I want to update the value of smallest temp. I want to set it equal to temperature, row, column. And only when I get to the end of the entire search, only after I finish both loops, am I able to say what the smallest temperature value is. So let's run through that quickly just to see what the output is. We're super brilliant. So looking at our table, we can see that the smallest temperature value, oh, it is the very first one. It's the 32.4. Let's change the values in our arrays just so that we can feel secure. Like if we had a smaller value somewhere else, we change this 40 to a 4. We'll run the program again to ensure that it shows us that that new smallest value is the smallest value in the table. Sure enough, you can see that now the data values have been adjusted, storing our new information, and it tells us at the end that our smallest data value is 4. Awesome. Let's step through our program with the debugger just so we can visualize what's going on in the computer's memory. I'm going to set my breakpoint right here at the line where I set the smallest temperature. Remember, you can set a breakpoint by just clicking over in the margin next to the line numbers. But now I'm going to run my program. I'm going to click the debugger button. That'll run my program and make it pause once I've reached that spot in the program. So you can see that it's already printed out the kind of visual view of the data. That was the first thing that happened in our program. And now we've reached line 25 and we're about to execute that. The computer always highlights the line that it's about to execute. So it hasn't quite done that yet. Getting ready to set the smallest temp value equal to the temperature array at position 0, 0. You can see the contents of the temperature array here. It's only going to show us one row at a time. So it's showing us the top row, the ones at position, the ones in row 0 are up here, showing as we go across. So I'm going to click my step over button right here, a little crooked arrow. And you can see that now it's set the smallest temperature to be 32.4. That's because that's the value at position 0, 0 in the temperature array. So now I'm getting ready to execute this for loop. Let me step into that. And so you can see now the row value is 0, getting ready to execute the inside for loop. When I click the step over button, now I have a value for the column 0, and 0 is less than the days. And so we're executing the body of that inside for loop, checking to see if the temperature at position 0, 0 is less than smallest. And of course it's not, it's equal to it. So we're not anticipating that it's going to change anything about the smallest temp. Nope. Now I'm getting ready to increase the value of column to add the value 1 to it. I'm going to click the down arrow and we'll see the column change value. Yep. And 1's still less than 7. So we're executing the body of the loop and checking to see, is the value in the temperature array at row 0, 1 less than the smallest temp. You can see down here, it's showing us the temperature at position row column is 55.6. That's the temperature at row 0, column 1. And back in our visual view of the data, that's that row 0, column 1 information. So the debugger is keeping track of all the same data that we visually think about in our program. All right, so let's step into the next line. It wasn't less than the smallest temperature. The 55 was bigger than 32. So we're moving on, increasing the value of column by 1. So now it's 2. 2 is less than 7, so we're executing the body of the loop again. We're going to compare the temperature array at row 0, column 2. That data value is the 76.2. We're checking to see if that's less than 32, and it's not. So we're going to increase the value of column. So now column's going to become 3. 3 is less than 7. It's checking to see if the temperature value at row 0, column 3 is less than the 32. It is not. The temperature at 0, 3 is 80.9. So we're just going to continue on with the program, increase the value of column. So it's 4. 4 is still less than 7. And now we're comparing the temperature value at row 0, column 4, which is the 4.0, to see if that's less than the smallest temperature value. It, of course, is 4 is less than 32. So we're going to update the value of smallest and execute the body of the if statement here. And you can see down at the bottom, now the value of smallest is set to be 4.0. Now we're super smart as human beings and know that that's the smallest value of the table. That's because we visually scanned through everything that was in there, and we know that 4 was the smallest of the values. The computer does not know that yet. There could be a smaller value out here that we have not yet considered. Maybe there's a 1 or a 0 or a -67. Any of those could be down here in the remaining portions of the table. So we cannot yet stop looping if we are the computer. We have to carry things out to the very end. But again, we know that there aren't going to be any smaller data values here, so I'm going to quickly step through the last few iterations. So we're on the iteration where we're getting ready to update the column, so it's 5. 5 is less than 7, and the value at 0, 5 is not less than the smallest temperature. Now we're going to increase column to be 6. 6 is less than 7. The data value in the temperature array at row 0, column 6 is not less than the smallest temperature. Now we're going to increase the value of column to be 7, which is not less than 7. So that ends the inside loop, and we go back out for our next iteration of the outer loop. We're going to get ready to increase the value of row by 1 as the update step. So we're going to increase row to be 1. Checking to see if 1 is less than 2. That was our loop control for the outside loop. And of course, that is true. So now we're going to get ready to go through all the different columns for row 1. So we've been through everything for row 0. Now we're on the step where we're iterating through all the columns for row number 1. And the first step will be to re-update the value of column so that it starts at 0. See that when I step over the next line, we'll see the variable pop up for column, and its value will be 0. Yep, down here at the bottom. Now we're checking to see if the value at position row 1, column 0 is less than the smallest temp. It's not. So we're going to increase the column to be 1. 1's less than 7. The value at row 1, column 1 is not less than the smallest. We're going to increase the column by 1, so it's 2. The value in the temperature array at row 1, column 2 is not less than the smallest. Increase the column, so it's 3. 3 is still less than 7, so we're going through the body of the loop. We're checking to see if the temperature array at row 1, column 3 is less than the smallest. It's not. So we're going to increase the column to 4. 4 is less than 7. We're checking to see if the value in the temperature array at row 1, column 4 is less than the smallest. It's not. You can follow along with like what's the value in the temperature array, either by looking at kind of your own printout or view of what's in the column information, or by looking in the debugger. It shows you what the value of the current temperature at position row column is. But again, we already scanned through everything and know that we're not going to find anything that's smaller here. So we're updating the column, so it's 5. 5's less than 7. The value at position 1, 5 is not less than the smallest temp. I'm going to increase column to be 6. 6 is less than 7. The value in the temperature array at row 1, column 6 is not less than the smallest temp. We're going to update the value of column, so it's 7, and 7's not less than 7. So now we're going to check to see if we need another iteration, another row of the table. We're going to increase the value of row, so it'll become 2 down here in the debugger. Yep. And 2 is not less than 2, so it ended that exterior loop. And now we're getting ready to print out the smallest temperature value, which is the 4.0. If I switch over to the console view, I'll see that it did print that information out to the screen. We're getting ready to end the program. So we wrote a nested loop to allow us to find the smallest temperature value over a 2-week period. Pause the video now and try to write on your own the algorithm that would find the largest temperature on a Sunday. Remember, we said this would only require a single loop. We won't need a nested loop because we're only looking at that one column in the table. After you pause the video, you can restart it to check your answer.